And speaking of making stuff happen, we've got a regional championships to talk about where Robin Schulz was definitely making stuff happen. Liverpool Regionals was this past weekend, had 372 players in attendance, and the 2018 world champion Robin Schulz was the winner with, I think, a deck that a lot of people would be surprised. Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. Azul, is this something you would have expected to see winning the event in a field full of Mew VMAX?
Um, I mean, it's the deck is so much more than Rapid Strike Urshifu, though. It's almost one of those decks where you look at it and it's kind of just like, what are the best pieces to solve the puzzle of the format? And it's just like, oh, it is kind of Rapid Strike Urshifu, but it only plays like a 2/2 Rapid Strike Urshifu. And then the other attackers are like a 1 Hoopa and a 1 Baby Moltres. So it's kind of just like, what is the best fighting Pokemon that can KO? Uh, what is it called? Arceus, and also just be powerful in matchups. Okay, that's Rapid Strike Urshifu. And then it's like, okay, how can we make it so Rapid Strike Urshifu can actually compete consistently up against Mew VMAX? And it's like, okay, let's throw in some of these dark Pokemon. And then, I mean, the list is crazy. It's wild. It's probably the hardest deck to play in the format for sure. I think maybe even harder to play than Sanders' control deck that we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, a lot of one ofs. Every supporter is a one of.
22
And
one of cards. 22. That is insanely high for a Pokemon TCG deck. Normally, whenever someone shows me like their first Pokemon they've built, like deck that they've built, it has 22 one ofs, right? Like 1/1/1 lines of all their Pokemon, and you're like, all right, you got to go back to the drawing board on this. Let's up the consistency, play more copies of these cards because it's going to make your deck better. But Robin was like, no problem. One of every single supporter as well. That was probably the craziest part to me, is that there was no duplicate supporters in the entire deck.
yeah, that was definitely a little bit. It was a little bit like there was no research, there was no Marnie. I think a lot of the supporters made sense to have one ofs, but there was a lot of them. There was one Raihan, makes sense to have one Clara. Okay, we've been seeing that in a lot of the Arceus decks with the Moltres. You got a Moltres in here, got to bring it back. One boss. Okay, that's pretty standard. If Urshifu decks play a boss, especially with Inteleon, they usually have one of those. But then you get into what you would consider the draw supporters, and there's like one Bird Keeper, one Cynthia's Ambition, and one Zinnia's Resolve, and that
And
was
no
it.
research. Like,
No research, no Marnie.
yeah, absolutely wild. Also has the one Cheryl, which can give you
Yep.
the healing option on your VMAXs, which I think, it's got 330 HP. So if you're not playing against Mew VMAX, just getting a turn to heal a Pokemon with that much HP just sets your opponent back so far. And I mean, that's why Sharon's Care is so good in the Arceus decks, right? Because you can just heal so much damage out of play. And then I guess if you're playing all these one ofs, you got to play one copy of Peonia, right? Because you're gonna prize something important at some point that you need
Yeah.
in one of these matchups because everything is a one of.
Yeah, and I mean, whenever they did, there was an ordinary rod and a pal pad. So if any of the one ofs ever got lost to the discard pile, they could be recovered. But yeah, definitely a lot going on in that deck. You have to play very precise. And we saw quite a few very good players play the deck. Only one of them made it into day two. Tord did face Pedro on the winning in, but then like Fabian and Nico, I'm not sure where they got lost along the route in day one. But yeah, a lot of great players playing it, but definitely looks to be quite a hard deck to pilot. And then I'm sure with that many one ofs, there's got to be a couple games in there where you're just going to lose to having some pretty unfortunate prize cards. Because with that many one ofs, it's just bound to happen. Even with the Peonia, that's a supporter you're using for your turn to try and fish out some prize cards. But you have 6 of them, especially if you're using it
Yeah.
before you draw any prize cards. There's 6 of them. You're trying to get one of those 6. It can be hard to get it sometimes. So crazy deck. Huge congrats for Robin to winning with it. And yeah, I don't expect it to see a ton of play from here on out. I don't know if anyone's going to try and pick it up to try and master it. But if you're looking for a challenge, I would definitely recommend picking up this deck and trying it out, because the couple games I'm putting with it, it's pretty hard to play, and I haven't even figured out most of the lines of play that you can even do with the deck. So it's pretty difficult for sure.
This is definitely one of those decks where, in order to play it at its highest potential, you have to put in a ton of hours with it. And you have to, even after you've put in a ton of hours, every single decision matters so much. Just that's the nature of playing a deck with so many one ofs, because if you
Yeah.
use a key resource at the wrong time, you're not going to have access to it because it's a one of. Like, you've got a couple ways to recover a few things, like you said, but you're using your one boss, using that one bird keeper as a switching option. If you use those just too early, just because you're like, hey, I need to draw some cards, or hey, I could take this knockout, that could lose you the game in 3 turns and you just don't even know it yet. So that's what I love
Yeah.
about decks like this, and what I love about seeing great players like Robin pilot them to success. So massive congrats to Robin. I also think it's funny that Robin won the 2018 World Championships, and then in the 2019 season won an international championships, and then now in 2022 wins his first regionals of like the new cash era. I believe he won, some
Yeah.
regionals back in the day in Germany before the regionals were quite as big as they are nowadays. So
Yeah.
you kind of usually players are like, all right, my goal is to win a regionals. Robin was like, I'm gonna start with worlds, then we'll scale it back and I'll get the regionals eventually. Maybe Robin will win his first League Cup this coming season or something like that. Who knows?
That's literally what I was about to say.